And welcome back to another episode of TWiP Weddings. My name is Bruce Clark, and look, we've got the band back together. We've got Robert Evans and Brian Caparici together in the same room.
All in two countries.
I was beginning to think you guys were like the president and the vice president, and we couldn't have you in the same place at the same time.
Glad to be back.
Excellent. So this week's episode, we're going to talk about some of the must-have personality traits of wedding photographers. But before we get into that topic, we want to remind you how you can participate in the show. We've got several different ways to interact with us. First, you can visit the website at thisweekinphoto.com/weddings. There you will find the show notes for each episode, which contain links to everything we mentioned on the show. You can also leave your comments and feedback for us in the comments section. If you have a question or a suggestion for a topic that you'd like us to talk about in a future episode, just click on the Contact Us link at the top of the page and then select TWiP Weddings from the drop-down list to send us a message. Or if you prefer using Twitter, you can add the hashtag TWiPWed, and we'll keep our eye out for your posts. We're also on Instagram and on Facebook, so check us out there. Join in. We just gave away recently a couple of Roberto Venezuela's books over there through our Facebook group, so it pays to be a Facebook member of our Facebook group. So there you go. So let's jump into it. What do you guys say?
All right. Yeah.
So I ran across this article on a website, and we'll put a link to it in the show notes. But I ran across this article on Picr, and it basically they had talked to other wedding photographers and asked them what they thought some of the must-have personality traits. I think we can all agree, right? To be a good wedding photographer, you got to have the technical skill, right? And you got to know your way around your camera. But it really goes, extends way beyond that, right? There's a lot of soft skills and certain personality traits that can go a long way towards being a great wedding photographer. So today we thought it'd be fun to kind of share our thoughts on the article and just talk about what traits we think would be good to have if you're going to be a wedding photographer. So I want to throw it out to you guys. First of all, did you guys get a chance to kind of review, look through the article and look at some of the personality traits that they talked to 4 photographers, and each photographer gave a personality trait. Mm-hmm. So the 4 personality traits they came up with were empathy, composure, honesty, and passion. So those were the 4 personality traits that they listed. Do you guys agree? Disagree?
No, I agree. Those are some good starts. I think personality is probably sometimes the more important. I mean, we always talk about, it's usually the number one thing, like, hey, if you're going to choose your photographer, I always say choose someone that you would invite to your wedding anyway if they weren't photographing your wedding. The personality is a huge issue. And I think composure is also, that one jumps out to me, like how you deal with situations and people on the wedding day. Is super important because they don't always go perfectly. And so how you deal with it, I mean, you can have a little bit of a disaster, I guess, or whatever you want to call it, but it just really depends on, how you deal with it.
Yeah, keeping your cool under pressure, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Either of you guys, have you ever lost your composure on a wedding day?
I haven't. No, I can think of.
Either not maybe not in front of the client, but maybe like where you went away and was just like, oh.
I have. I'll tell you a funny story. This was like years and years ago. I never did it in front of the clients either, but I was doing a wedding at the Four Seasons in Beverly Hills, or the Regent Beverly Wilshire, and I had this groom, and he was somehow in the music business. He was super important. And I was doing family photos, and, because I had to, and the bride wanted them, and her mom wanted them. And while we were doing them, like, you could clearly see on his face that he wasn't into doing these photos. Like, literally rolling his eyes and doing whatever he could to be obnoxious, and sometimes even mocking me.
Oh, right.
And when that happened, I was like, "Oh, you bastard!" But I was like smiling, and I was like doing my job, but boy, I needed to vent when I was done because it was like 30 minutes of hell. And so we finished, and then we had like a little time. I think this was all prior to ceremony, so we had a little time prior to the ceremony, and my assistant and I went into the bathroom that was kind of near the room where we were. We went in there. It was a small bathroom, like only 2 stalls, 1 urinal. And I literally like looked under, made sure nobody was in the stalls, and then I just went off. I was like, "That son of brother, did you?" And we were like, I know. I mean, we just went on for like 10 or 15 minutes, and
In the bathroom?
in the bathroom, and just. I just felt better. I just needed to get that out.
Get it out, yeah.
I was like, oh my, because I'd never been treated that way or had someone just be that obnoxious. So all done, wash your hands, walk out the door. So just outside the bathroom, there was like a little like sitting area. And I walk out the door, and the groom was sitting right there.
Oh, no.
That same guy. But you know what? I didn't even care. Like, I was just so like, I just smirked at him and walked away. So I don't know whether he did or did not hear my whole tirade, but,
Yeah. Oh, that was another groom I was talking about. Yeah, not you. No.
Not you, you short little bald piece of.
Brian, how about you? Have you ever lost your composure?
No, I've never. I mean, I photograph every wedding with my wife, and so her and I are very much on the same wavelength in terms of nonverbal communication. So I think even just like when situations have happened or when stress, goes up or something that we don't, necessarily agree with, we can kind of both just look at each other and we know exactly what we're thinking. So it's almost a great way to kind of get it off your chest without actually having to get it off your chest. We have this thing sometimes, if we're like sitting down or eating dinner or whatever, if something is happening and we're just like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is happening, we'll both kind of like press our legs against each other and press. So we're both kind of like, are you serious right now? So we kind of do it in like nonverbal ways. But no, we've never actually freaked out. I mean, certainly sometimes we've left a reception and been like, oh my gosh, like, did you see whatever? Did you hear whatever? But it's never been anything we've done in front of a client or in a way that a client could potentially hear us unless they mic'd us somehow and heard our conversations on the way home.
Yeah, so I think that's important, like keeping your composure and keeping your cool and being calm under pressure. I think that's what our clients, expect from us, right? They and a lot of times, particularly if there isn't a planner or anybody else around, if things start to go sideways or go south, who's the first person they generally look to? Is a lot of times it's us, right? Because we're there and they figure we probably have the most experience with weddings. So what's some advice you guys can give in terms of like keeping calm under pressure when the floor is falling out from underneath you and everything's falling apart? Do you guys have any like tips or strategies to kind of like keep your cool and keep calm under those situations and not show fear?
Yeah, I sort of like this is something that I think I do fairly well in general in life, not necessarily just about photographing a wedding. And I think that this is something where I love the idea of this conversation being about personality traits, not just a facade that you put on a wedding day. I think that these things need to be something that's very ingrained in who you are as a person. Like you have to be someone that doesn't externalize stress very well or doesn't get overwhelmed very easily. And if you do, then either you need to find ways to work on that, or maybe wedding photography isn't necessarily for you.
Yeah, because being honest with yourself about it, right?
Yeah, totally. And that was actually one of the things that they put there, and I think it's a good thing to have is like don't try and be someone you're not. Right, so if you do get overwhelmed easily, if you don't deal well with multitasking or many things happening at the same time, if you get overwhelmed like that, then I don't think weddings is going to be the place for you. You can put that sort of face on all you want, but under pressure, when push comes to shove on that wedding day, when you're under that stress, you're going to crack under it if it's not who you genuinely are. So I think in general, in terms of like how I deal with that, internalize it in terms of everyday life, let alone not just necessarily a wedding. But I always kind of look at it, and I always say, my wife, she always gets upset at me for this because she's like, why are you not getting upset about this? And I'm like, there's nothing I can do. And so that's how I've always dealt with things, where it's like, if it's something that I can have an effect on, then I'll do what I have to do to make the outcome positive. If it's something that I can't control, I kind of take the stance where it's like, well, I'm going to have to deal with this anyways because I can't control it, so what am I going to do, right?
Yeah, you get stressed
and I'll do whatever I can. Yeah, you get stressed and worried about something that you cannot affect. So that's something that I think is a good way to deal with it. At least, again, that's how I deal with it. One of the best books that I ever read, and actually, as I'm saying this, I want to reread it now just to because it's been quite a while. It's a Dale Carnegie book, but it's not the book that most people would be thinking of when I say Dale Carnegie.
You think How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Yeah, so you think How to Win Friends and Influence People, which I think the concepts in that are very relatable to the conversation that we're going to have today. But I think Dale Carnegie has another book, and it's something to do with how to deal with stress. I forget the actual title of it. Maybe I'll look it up here while I'm doing it.
Sure.
But it basically, he talks about things like that, like here's how you deal with overwhelm, here's how you deal with stress, here's how you can not be worried about all these things. Actually, I think it's worry. Dale Carnegie, How to Deal with Worry.
How to Deal with Worry.
How to Stop Worrying, that's what it's called.
How to Stop Worrying. Okay, we'll link to that in the show notes.
How to Stop Worrying and Start Living. And it really addresses like all those things about dealing with overwhelm. You know, what's the worst that can happen? One principle he talks about is when you're faced with something like that, assume that the worst thing is going to happen, right? So like predict out whatever that is, right? Like, okay, so the worst thing that could happen is X. If you can find a way to become okay with that worst case scenario, then basically anything else is going to be better than that. Yeah. So that's like one of his, his teachings and one of his mechanisms on how to deal with that kind of stress, right? So I don't know if that's some general things, but I do think that it needs to be something that you practice outside of shooting a wedding, right? It's got to be something that's so ingrained as part of who you are, so that it comes out naturally on a wedding day.
Yeah, I want to ask both of you guys, do you think if you're like a really quiet, shy, introverted person, that you can be a successful wedding photographer?
Totally.
Yes, because that's me.
Yeah. So do you find, like, do you have to kind of get out of a bit of that shell, Robert, on a wedding day, kind of get away from the because you do have to at some point kind of get out there and interact and kind of
yeah, it's something that I obviously learned early, like, again, going back to some of my first memories of training to shoot weddings, like the first few times I went out with a photographer, and I worked with this one guy, I think I've told this story before, where he would stand behind the camera, he had a squeaky toy in his bag, and he would wiggle his butt, and he'd be like, all right, on three, everybody over here say pizza. And I was like, oh my gosh, there's no way I could ever do this job. But of course, I developed my own style and my own interaction with people. Again, going back, remembering the first time I was handed the camera to go take a picture at a reception. Again, we shot Hasselblads, and the photographer told me, he's like, all right, walk up to the couple, touch their hands, and say, hey, you guys, can I get a picture? And just back away, 10 feet, whatever it was, that we had the Hasselblads preset. And I was so petrified about just disturbing them while they were dancing, and one of those things. And even today, like, I don't generally do it. I've said this before. I'll usually have my assistants walk around cocktail hour and do the shots where there's 3 or 4 people standing around, like, hey, you guys, let's get a picture. And I'll shoot, long lens candids of people's. But occasionally I still have to do that. I find myself in that position, so I have to like come out of that shell and I just tell myself, I'm like, look, I'm the one that's, like Brian said, I'm the one that's making it worse in my own head or worrying about it. So I just go do it, But, you have to take control of people. You have to be in control. You have to be loud enough without yelling and pleasant and to, corral people and get them to what you want to do. And
yeah, you have to be assertive sometimes, right?
Yep. And I've just learned to do that. I mean, again, I've talked a lot about I do a lot of prep so that I set myself up for success on the wedding day and I'm not running around like a stressed chicken with my head cut off. So that definitely helps. But yeah, I have to be assertive and I have to take control. And I went through that process. I mean, I've been doing it a long time now. So generally it's sort of second nature. But I did have to get past that. But I think if you're that type of person, you have to ask yourself then, let's go with one of the other words, really, do you have enough passion to continue to do this? Mm-hmm. Is it something that you really love? And just recognize that's not your greatest quality, but challenge yourself and overcome it and do it. Because, I mean, like I said, I was that person. I was like, oh my gosh, I have to, I'd much rather be the person to stand in the corner and watch what's going on. Even going to parties and things like that when I was younger, bars with girls, like I was like, you come talk to me. I wasn't the one that was walking up with the cheesy line and the thing and the, so.
Did you fall from heaven or whatever? I don't know.
Yeah. But I was thinking about that too when Brian was talking about doing this too. Like, you really have to be authentic. Like, if you're trying to be someone that you're not, a phony stands out a mile away. and that's not going to help you in your business too. So you really need to be authentic. And I think most importantly, it's, you know, we always say this, but really just be yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, you don't have to do it, you know, just like I learned. I didn't have to stick my bottom out behind a tripod and do a squeaky toy or whatever. I developed my own style to get people to smile and interact with them. And you have to do the same thing. You have to kind of do what comes natural, of course, while being appropriate and, you know, all those other things.
Yeah, because there can be a lot of, you know, the chaos and things that happen on the day, but you do have to, you know, again, remain calm and cool. I just came off of 5 straight days of Sikh and Hindu Indian weddings, and those are just a whole other level of craziness going on. So you have to be, you know, you got to remain calm under pressure, and there are times you have to be assertive. You have to kind of get in there. I don't know if you guys have ever photographed Sikh or your Hindu weddings, right? They can be, you know, family. Everybody's kind of crowded in, and you have to kind of get in there and fight for your turf almost to get the shots, to get, you know, things done. You know, at certain events, right? So you do have to be a bit assertive at times and not be afraid to kind of jump in there. And if you're very timid and shy, maybe those types of cultural weddings might be a real challenge for you, right? So, but people attract, you know, like you were saying, you kind of attracts like, right? So you tend to work a lot with couples and clients that are kind of a fit for you, right? So if you're kind of more outgoing and gregarious, that might be the type of client that you attract. Whereas if you're, you know, quiet, more subdued, calm, maybe that's the type of client that you attract. Generally, there's always going to be exceptions, right? But for the most part, I think we find that a lot of the clients that we photograph for are similar to us. Like, they'd be people probably that, you know, we would hang out with, or, you know, at least they would invite us to their wedding type of people, right? So
yeah, I absolutely agree with that.
So
I just want to comment, like, and I don't know if I want to necessarily bring this into a whole different direction, but maybe just as a comment, and we can see if we want to discuss any further. But a lot of these things that was listed in this blog post, and I think a lot of the things that we as an industry and as a community discuss are often things that are very me-focused, right? Like, they're very, almost in a way, selfish. You know, like, I need to be honest, I need to be passionate, I need to have these things, I need to be certain ways. And I guess my only thought about that process of thinking selfishly about those things is it is very me-focused. And there's this concept, or this idea, I guess, and just sort of how human beings think. Tony Robbins actually talks a lot about it, where it's what you focus on, you'll move towards, right? So he uses a simple example of, if you're in a really tight parking lot, if you're trying to back out and you're saying, don't hit that car, don't hit that car, don't hit that car, don't hit that car, you'll probably hit the car, right? But if you say, go into that free space, go into that free space, back up into that free space, because you're focusing on the positive, like, you end up going in that direction, right? And so I think these things are very me-focused, and I think that is a wrong direction for us to take when trying to become better people for our clients, because that's who we're doing it for, really. So when I look at that list, like, my immediate thing was to look at that list and say they're very me-focused, and I sort of made a small little list here of my own to think, like, what are the things that I think are more in line with personality traits that we have to exhibit, but that are more client-focused. And I came up with a list like relatable. Like, I think we need to be relating with our clients on a very, like, we need to find common ground with people very quickly, right? That's a huge thing, but that's very them-focused, not us-focused.
Does that fall in a bit with empathy?
I would say empathy, but empathetic almost takes the route of, like, I need to understand people so that I can find that. Whereas I'm saying we need to be relatable to them and find what they're interested in. And that was my next thing, was interested. Like, we need to find what's going for them, and how can I relate to them in a better way, right?
Yeah, so how'd you do that? Give me some examples, because I agree with that one too. I think we spend a lot of time up front getting to know our clients and getting to know our couples and finding out what their likes and interests are, so that we can, you know, even if it's just a discussion point when we're out doing formals, to lighten the mood a bit, get them talking.
I think it goes well beyond even just, like, again, these are personality traits that are not, you know, just in the silo of being a wedding photographer, but I think it even goes further than just with your bride and groom. Like, there's many times on a wedding day where I'll see someone photographing, you know, like a guest or something, and they'll have a camera, and I'll be like, oh, are you trying to take a picture? Like, you should try to, you know, move over this way, or try doing this, or I see you use a Nikon, do you like it, blah, 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 and I'll find some kind of common ground with them. Or I'll see someone pull in like, you know, a Volkswagen Jetta, and I'll be like, oh, how do you like your Volkswagen? Like, I've got a Tiguan, I love mine, it's really great, and blah, blah, blah. And it just starts a conversation, and then all of a sudden, although that's not my bride and groom, and I'm not trying to be best friends with everybody, I think that being relatable to more people and having that presence on a wedding day ultimately improves the experience for everybody. because then next time that uncle talks with the bride and groom, they're going to say, oh man, like your wedding photographer, like he was such a nice guy, I can't believe it, blah blah blah. And there's all these things that can then affect the sort of the perception of who you are and what kind of a photographer you are.
Yeah.
So I think just finding, like, just for that specific idea, finding things that you can quickly make connections to, and then using that as like a starter of a conversation.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay. What else have you got on your list?
Interested was the other one, and I think that it's, again, going back to the sort of Dale Carnegie 101, it's like become genuinely interested in other people. And I think that that is very relevant for us as wedding photographers, because we're photographing people on what is the most important day in their lives. And so there's so many times that I hear photographers talking about on a wedding day, or I'll hear a florist or a videographer start talking about other weddings they photographed. It's like, no, like the only wedding that I've ever photographed on a couple's wedding day is that couple's wedding. Do you know what I mean? Like that's the only wedding they'll ever talk about. And then when I'm planning with the bride and groom, although I want to obviously make it known that I have experience and that this isn't my first wedding, I want to make sure that everything is relating back to them. I don't want to go on some story that is completely unrelated to them. I want to find ways that I can become genuinely interested in their plans. Like, what are they thinking? How did they meet? What's their decor? What's their theme? What's their timeline like? I want to find things that's relevant to them.
Mm.
So I think being interested in other people and being genuinely interested. Again, this comes to the whole like honesty part, being genuine or authentic, like Robert put it. I love that. You've got to be genuinely interested. It can't be like the fake, like used car salesman or like the furniture salesman. Like when I go to Leon's, it's like, what's your daughter's name? She's very cute. It's like, you don't care what my daughter's name is. You just want to sell me a bed, right?
Right.
So it needs to be completely genuine. But I feel like we're connecting with people on a much deeper level by photographing their wedding than someone would be with me if I was buying a couch for them, right? So I think that we have more opportunity to dig deeper with them. So yeah, I think being interested is another big one.
Excellent. Robert, what would you add to the list that wasn't there?
Well, and if you're not that person that's, maybe you are, and it comes down to insecurities, I'm sorry. I mean,
Right.
if you're, it comes down to being insecure and not being in that situation. But I think Brian made a couple great points. Like, if that's not naturally you, then start asking questions that, based on the information that he just gave you. Like you ask your couples or guests on the wedding day, like, whatever it is, like, hey, that's a really great, like, jacket or shirt, or like you said, finding commonalities, but just asking, especially your couples, like asking questions, especially in a meeting. We've talked about this. How did you guys meet? How did he propose? Tell me about your decor.
Mm-hmm.
What's your vision? Get them talking about yourselves, and you stop talking about yourself, and you're going to win a lot more just by following those simple rules. If that's not naturally, who you are.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things, I don't know if this is a personality trait, but looking at that list, I think on a wedding day, and that doesn't matter what you shoot, a photographer, this is a great trait to have, is really sort of anticipation. Anticipating a moment, anticipating what might happen, put yourself in a position to capture an image that could possibly happen.
Mm-hmm.
But a really good photographer sort of anticipates and is thinking, 10 seconds ahead of what could happen, what would happen if I went here and did this, things like that. Like, I always try to do that. I always say one of my favorite parts about the wedding day is sort of the thrill of the hunt. What can I come back with? What emotional moment can I capture that day? Because, yes, we spend a long time, or plenty of time, doing family pictures and sort of setting up things from time to time, but it's like, what are those real, raw, authentic, crying, heart-bleeding moments that can I capture that day? Yeah. So just sort of anticipating, always thinking ahead, 10, 20 seconds. All right, what's my next move? What's my next move? And how that's going to affect, if I go here during the ceremony when the coordinator told me not to, what could happen?
Right.
Is it really worth the shot? Or should I follow the rules, or maybe should I bend them just a little bit? It's just sort of having common sense, but anticipating each moment throughout the day.
Yeah, for sure. Damn, I was going to do that one, that you stole mine.
Oh, sorry.
Well, I think I want to maybe just comment on that a little bit, because I think that it breaks out to be, I think that that's a personality trait that is extremely applicable on the photography side of it, but I think if we pull back a little bit further and look at the sort of overlying principle on that, which is like the idea of being aware or being present, right? I think that obviously then opens up a huge realm of benefits to both you and the client, both from a photographic standpoint, because if you're truly aware, if you're truly present, if you're actually observing and listening to what's happening around you, then all of a sudden you're going to find those little moments to photograph and to create some really meaningful image. But then also, if you are aware on the personality trait side, where it's like being cognizant of your surroundings, right, and being sort of like sensitive to the way that people are, or some of the mood or the feelings, or to kind of catch those little nonverbal cues that people give out that would sort of indicate whether you should go in or you should not go in, or you should do certain things, or
Right.
wow, this moment is like maybe too private that I shouldn't photograph this, right? Or like little things like that. I think just being aware in general is a good trait to have, because it's going to affect and inspire your photography, but then also affect and inspire how you show up in a room.
Yeah, and knowing like being aware and knowing when when it's time to maybe give your couple a break.
Yeah,
Because it's
totally,
easy for us. Like we could keep shooting and shooting and shooting, right?
totally,
But
yeah.
the couple sometimes you can tell, like, and I always look for these little signs, but you can kind of always tell, and it's usually the groom, but sometimes it's the bride. You can always tell when they've kind of reached this point where it's like, okay, we need to like,
Yeah.
you guys need to just go take 10 minutes, go have a cocktail, take a little break. We're gonna go do this while you relax, and they come back and they really appreciate it, because then they they get a chance to kind of like breathe, relax, and because it can be a long stressful day for them too. So you have to be aware that they have their limits and things too.
Right.
And not to push them too far, even though it might result in a great image. You don't want to push them to that point where they just like shut down completely, and then you lose.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, another time that shows up for me, and I'm probably overly aware of things like this, but just because it's part of my personality. In the morning, right? Like let's say, just for example, we're at the salon photographing the bride and groom, or the bride and groom, sorry, the bride and her bridesmaids, and I photograph with my wife, right? So she comes with me. But something that I've always been aware of, even when I've had second shooters or other photographers assisting me when my wife couldn't make it, I would always be overly aware of how we show up in that room. Because I don't want it to be where like we're standing in one place for too long with this giant camera pointing at all these girls who are like kind of very raw and getting ready, and all of a sudden becoming very camera aware. If you're in a little salon and you're staying in the same corner, pointing the camera at the same bridesmaid getting her hair and makeup done, like she can't move. Right, so all of a sudden she's like kind of like looking like awkward, and she knows you're there, and she's all of a sudden her demeanor completely changes, and then it just becomes kind of awkward for people. So I like to be like very aware of that and very sensitive to that, where I'll take a quick image, but then I don't want to stay in one place for too long. I want to kind of be moving around a lot. I also don't want it to feel like we're circling the room, right? It's like where's the photographer now? They're like looking around. So sometimes I'll just kind of sit and chill, or I'll just like go and talk with one of the bridesmaids or something and say, oh, I noticed that you've got your daughter over here, we've got a daughter too, how old is she, blah blah blah, and I'll find that common ground. And again, that's my personality, so it's not going to work for everybody, but then all of a sudden you can help them become less camera aware by noticing you as a person in the room, as opposed to you being just the photographer, the camera that moves around, the moving tripod type of thing. So I think that's really important.
Right. Yeah. Well, you need to become a part of the day.
Yeah.
It's not your day. And I've seen, witnessing a lot of photographers and videographers. I'm not picking on them, but I'm usually at weddings with somebody else, obviously, that's not my team, and I'm watching some of the things that they do. And Brian even said it earlier, it's like, don't have the day self-centered around you. We're there as part of the day. We're part of a team of vendors working towards one common goal, making sure the bride and groom have a great day, and of course your job is to make sure that they have beautiful wedding photos. But you can't be so unaware or absorbed in what you're doing and thinking that you're the most important thing that it's obtrusive. I've witnessed this so many times before, and again, I'm sorry I'm picking on video people, but that's who I watch at the wedding.
Right.
I was on a bus one time, we were going from one place to the other, and this person had, shooting Super 8 and was getting all crazy, and he's in the bus and he's just totally just like putting his backside in bridesmaids' faces, and The final is he's like, oh, he goes to sit down right in front of the bride and sits on one of the bridesmaids' bouquets. I mean, you have to it's just you have to be aware of what you're doing. And I think as a photographer, I think the best example for us, or that's something similar to anybody, is just when you're backing up, think about that. You know, we're backing up to get a shot, no matter when or where it is. We need to look behind us and see what that's going to affect. Whether there's a pool behind you, or
we've all seen the video of the guy falling.
Whether you're going to step on a little kid, or whatever that is. But it's just really having awareness and forethought to know that the day doesn't revolve around you. You revolve around the day.
Yep. Yeah, I'm very aware of our surroundings, and if I'm getting in front of somebody, I try to minimize the amount of if I have to get in front of somebody, I'll say something and say, I'm just going to step in front of you for a second, get this shot, and then I'm going to get out of your way, just so that I'm not, so then they don't be like, oh, that photographer just stood in front of me the whole ceremony and I couldn't see. Like, particularly, I try to not get in that front row and get in front of the parents, right? Try to be very unobtrusive during those times. So yeah, being very aware of your surroundings. And that comes back also to anticipation, is sort of anticipating that something, could happen. I felt awful one time. I was photographing an Indian wedding, and there was, it gets very crowded, and there's a lot of people running around and whatever. And I didn't see him out of the corner of my eye, and I had I was shooting with 2 cameras, so I was just dropping one camera to the side of my body, and it had my 70-200 on it.
Oh,
and this little, probably about 3-year-old, came just at that exact moment, came running past my hip as I dropped my camera, and the lens hood front end kind of connected right in his face, knocked the poor little kid down. I was just like, but the parents were there. They're like, oh no, he shouldn't have been there. It's his father said, I'm really sorry, I just didn't see him, right? Because it's sometimes you get the blinders on and you're in the moment capturing stuff. So being aware and being watching, anticipating these things could happen, right? Kind
of being aware part too, I think, especially comes in during toasts.
Yeah, totally.
When we're in a room shooting toasts, you have to think about who you're standing. And sometimes you're right. You have to stand in front of someone really quickly, but like Bruce said, that's a really great. I'm gonna step in front of you. Let me get a few pictures and then get out of the way. But I'm always aware of where are the parents and where the most important people. Of course, I don't want to be standing in front of. And occasionally, I have to block other guests. But even when I'm doing that, I might go out on the dance floor, shoot 7 or 8 pictures of the person talking, and then get off the floor. I'm not standing there during the entire toast. I recognize, a lot of times the video people are on tripods and they have to, and that's great. But, we don't need 10 people out on the dance floor. Once I have that picture, I'm done.
Yeah, and that's a good one. Video one's a good one. You have to be aware too that it's a symbiotic relationship, right?
Yes.
You're trying to not get in their shots, and they're trying to avoid being in your shots, right? So the more you can work together and be aware of where they're going to be and where they're shooting from. So if there's video people, we always talk to them beforehand and say, hey, where are you going to be set up for this part? Just being aware of because sometimes you might not know that, hey, they've got a camera set up. Like I was at a wedding just recently, and the guy he had a Theta, one of those Ricoh Theta 360 cameras or whatever, so he was capturing a 360. So I just, said, oh, I see that it's there. I'll do my best to try to not block it or stand in front of it. And he really appreciated that, right?
Please don't go in front of the camera. You mean don't go anywhere?
Don't go anywhere. But little things like that. So being aware, of just other vendors and what they're doing, right?
Right.
That's a huge personality trait, I think, that is good to have. I want to ask both of you guys, what do you think is both your strongest trait and your weakest personality trait? Brian, I'll start with you.
Oh wow, that's a lot. Okay, here we go. That's okay. I think awareness is my biggest one. I think I'm very good at being able to sort of walk into a room and then quickly. And I guess this is now transcended to Sprout and how I came up with the idea for Sprout and everything I've done in terms of educating. I can break things down very easily. I can look at a room and quickly assess okay, don't go over there. This background's good. The light's great over there. This person's here. Watch out for that. Go here, and I can kind of chop it into its little pieces very quickly. And then, so with that, obviously, that's how I can, take a business concept and then chop it up into simpler steps and break it down to help teach. So that's obviously inspired the way that I teach as well. In terms of my weakness, I would almost wonder if somehow that in and of itself is sometimes a weakness too, right? Because it's sometimes I'm overly sensitive, and I'll actually sometimes err on the side of being empathetic as opposed to getting the shot, right? And I'll give an example of this. There was one wedding I photographed in 2011, and it was outdoors in the middle of the summer in this area at the Botanical Gardens that we have here. It was in full sun, and it was hot out. It was like feels like 45. For our American friends, that would be what, 110, I guess, or something. I don't know. It was really warm, right? Very, very, very warm.
Thank you for clarifying that for your American friends.
They're like 45. That's cold, right? So I'm photographing the ceremony, and the bride and groom are making their vows, and so I'm in the back of the sort of aisle in the green area and stuff, and photographing them. And then all of a sudden, I sort of recognize the best man. He starts to do like one of those little like wobbles, and he ends up passing out like right on top of the bride and groom, like right in the middle of their vows. It was like right out of an AFV video type of thing.
Yeah.
And in that moment, I had to make a judgment of, do I photo? Because everyone was worried, right? Everyone kind of got out of their seats, like like there was all these gasps, right? And I'm thinking, do I photograph it because this is a memory of the wedding day, I guess, right? Or I don't want to be that jerk that ends up photographing, the best man, the brother of the groom, having a heart attack or passing or whatever happens, right? Like I didn't want to be like, insensitive towards that, so I ended up not photographing it.
I think that's a good call. I've been in similar.
But the funny thing about it's hard, right? But then afterwards, right? He kind of he passed out because of heat, and apparently he does it all the time. I didn't know that. So afterwards, right? The bride and groom get him up. He sits down. They all kind of laugh about it, and immediately the groom looks to me. He goes, "Did you get that?" And I'm like, "No, I didn't get it." He wasn't upset or anything, but he was just sort of curious if I got it. But that was a time and an example when my sensitivity and my over empathetic personality, I suppose, ended up winning over me wanting to capture the moment.
So you wouldn't be a good war photojournalist, is what you're saying?
No, absolutely not.
But Brian, the good thing about that is if it happens again to you, there'll be 50 other people that will get the shot.
Right, yeah, exactly. There you go.
So Robert, how about you? What do you think is your strongest personality trait, and what do you think is your weakest?
I'll do weakest first. I still think it comes back to a little bit of the shyness, like maybe, letting that personality trait affect, what I maybe didn't get. I think I've pretty much moved past it, but at the same time, like I said, like I said it earlier in the show, if I'm in a situation where I have to do, just recently I did a wedding, and I didn't have an assistant. It was kind of like a second wedding, so it was really just a reception, and I was like, I don't need somebody else, I'm just going to do it. But I had to shoot cocktails. It's like in that position where I'm like, oh, I've got to go engage people, But it's all about challenging, yourself and your weaknesses, and I did, and I was fine with it. And like, it's literally like once you shoot 2 or 3 of them, you're sort of in that groove and you can do it. But it's almost still painful for me because I'm just like, oh my gosh, I don't want to go do this. But I challenge myself and I go do it, and and I try to have fun with the people. So I've learned like relating to them, talking to them, ask how they're doing. Hey, you guys want to get a photo? How's everyone doing? Great. It's a great purse, or it's a great, like giving compliments and sort of making it a game to myself. But I mean, I still think like it's still a challenge to me. It's still something that I think about. It is not second nature. So I would say that's probably still would be my weakness. And I think, then playing on my strengths, it's just sort of, again, being authentic, being real, being able to, I'm very calming. I've had many brides say like, oh my gosh, you have such a calming presence when they're nervous. So that's something that I don't try to do. That's sort of just part of me. But again, like how you react to things, and when things aren't maybe going exactly perfect. I remember, again, another quick story. A long time ago, I was still shooting Hasselblad. I was shooting a wedding. I'm at the front of the aisle. I had my Hasselblad, and it had a big Metz battery that had like batteries that pop in below it. It's like a cluster. And I'm shooting, 2 or 3 people come down the aisle, and for whatever reason, I didn't push the battery in far enough, and it comes falling out of the camera. It hits the ground, breaks all over the place, and now I don't have a battery in my flash, and I think it was at night. And I either had an assistant close by, or I had a second one in my pocket because I always had backup close. And I just literally like popped the new one in and kept shooting and didn't react to what happened. And the ceremony just went on. So yes, there was a noise and a bang, but it didn't change anything. So it's like, again, how you react to a situation. I was prepared to deal with it. But your influence, going back to being calming, your influence and how you're dealing with a particular situation influences those around you. So if you're crazy and stressed out while the bride's crazy because she's stressed out and now you're feeding into her stress, then everyone's stressed. But if you do have that, like they'll say me, I'm calming, and I'll just sort of like, it's going to be okay. We have plenty of time. We're going to get through this. Don't worry about it. Just talking to them and being myself, basically. I think that's a big plus. This isn't a personality trait, but being invisible is possible. Brian talked about that a little bit, not staying in one spot, moving around. That's the things I hear a lot. We didn't know you were there, and you're a very calming presence,
Bruce, what about you?
I knew you were going to ask me. I thought I was going to be able to get away with it.
No way, not that easy.
I would say it's kind of my weak one would probably be a little bit on the anticipation, because I think I'm good at anticipating certain moments, but I do catch myself a lot of times, particularly during like the reception and speeches, where I forget to shoot through the moment, if that makes any sense. So they'll do the speech, I'll shoot through it, and then I kind of get the blinders on a little bit. And then I relax and put the camera down when there's like at the crescendo of, say, the joke or something like that. So I've got to work on my anticipation and my timing of getting better with I'll shoot what they're saying, and then think I've kind of got it, and then relax the camera down, and then the true, like, the full laughter comes through, or whatever, or the sad, or whatever it is, right? And then I'm like grabbing the camera again, but then sometimes I've missed that little nuance, right? There's that moment, right? So just being better at anticipating and shooting through moments, I think, is something that I'm constantly trying to remind myself and to work on. And I think I'm getting better at it because I am trying to be more conscious of it, for sure. So, and then my strongest, I would have to say, is probably remaining calm under pressure and just projecting that outward, even if things are falling apart, just projecting, that everything's going to be fine. Because again, they always say, the camera looks both ways. So I'm always trying to be happy and cheerful and keep very upbeat, even if things are going kind of a little bit sideways. I'll share a fun story. We had a couple a few years ago that they got into a big fight with one another after the ceremony. So we come time to do formal photos, and we get to the location where we're photographing, and all the wedding party is out, sort of standing outside the limo, and no sign of the bride and groom, but we can hear them from a long way away. We can hear them, and they are dropping like F-bombs and C-bombs and like nobody's business. So we're like, oh, what's going on? And the couple said, well, they're having a little bit of a disagreement at the moment. And this disagreement went on for about an hour and a half, and they were not going to have anything to do with each other. They did not want to stand next to each other to get photos. So we had to like project just that everything's fine, everything's calm. We had to become almost a little bit of like Dr. Phil for the day, just sort of calm them down, and eventually managed to convince them, like, guys, look, it's your wedding day. You're going to really regret if we don't spend some time, get some nice photos of you together. So we ended up only having about 10 minutes with them, where we were able to get them together and get them like somewhat comfortable and in some nice photos, and they loved the photos and everything was fine. But we had to project this, outwards. We had to keep calm, and it would have been very easy to just be like, sort of freak, like, what are we gonna do? They don't doesn't want to do any photos together. So that was a situation where we just had to be very calm and get through it, and it was all good. So, and they appreciated it afterwards, and at the end they were like really sorry about what happened earlier. Hope it wasn't awkward for you. And we were sort of like, oh no, not at all. It's like, yes, it was extremely awkward, but no.
Like, it happens all the time. It's okay.
Happens all the time. Yeah. That's not the worst. That's not the worst story. That's the worst thing that's happened to us ever. But I did have a friend of mine who, she had a situation where at the reception, the mother of the bride had a heart attack and actually died on the dance floor during the reception. And she was like, nobody knew what to do, right? Like she's just like, she put her camera down. She was like, Brian, I'm not photographing them, putting the camera down, because nobody knew at the time. Like, they got her out of there, but she passed away later. But just something
Jeez.
awful, right? But that's just probably one of the worst situations I can think of where it's sort of like, the world falling apart during what's supposed to be the happiest time of their lives.
I mean, in a situation like that, too, like that is what, like Brian said, that's where whoever said it, that is way beyond your control. Like you just, I think then it's important to sort of go with what's happening. I had the same situation. It wasn't the mother of the bride. I had a guest die at a wedding. Same thing. Heart attack, dance floor. Paramedics came, defibrillators. They take the guy away. And I was like, oh my gosh, it stops the party for 45 minutes. And I'm like, what's going to happen? And the bride and groom were like, let's go on. So they hadn't cut cake or got a bouquet. They went right back to the party. And granted, it wasn't a mother, but it's like, again, it's all how you deal. They could have ended the reception right there and on a downer, but they chose, this is somebody else making that decision, but they chose to, let's continue. Let's cut the cake and throw our bouquet and dance a little more and, end the night not on that memory.
Yep, for sure. So I want to wrap this discussion up. I want to ask both of you guys with these personality traits. Do you think personality traits are something that somebody can be taught or can be learned, or do you just think it's kind of part of our DNA and our makeup and who we are? Like, what are you guys' thoughts?
I mean, both. You can't. We've talked about how we've sort of overcome some of ours, but I mean, if you don't have it, you don't have it. I mean, if one of you mentioned, if you get into it and you're like, yeah, this isn't the job for me, then do everyone a favor and don't do it. But I think you can overcome some of them. But personality is a very important part of this puzzle. To be a great wedding photographer, I would say even the bigger is the personality. The second is the talent or the skill.
Yeah, Brian, what do you think?
I have a pretty strong thought on this. I think, and it actually it's rooted. One of the best ways that I've seen this idea represented is an author by the name of Marcus Buckingham, and he's got a whole bunch of books. I think it's like Strengths 2.0 and the Strengths Movement, like a whole bunch of things like that. He does a bunch of writing about like finding your strengths and working within your strengths. But I remember he actually made a DVD, a video, like maybe 7 or 8 years ago, and I bought it when it first came out, and I still have it. I love it. It's called Trombone Player Wanted. I definitely encourage anyone to look for it. Maybe you can even find it on YouTube. I'm not sure. It's a bit older now. But his sort of argument and the way that he puts it, which I think summarizes my thoughts on it, is that people don't change. They just become more of who they are. So people don't change. They just grow into more of what they already have. So it's like if you were just, he uses the example, if you were just like horrible at math, right? Like what we've been trained to do through schooling is that, if you get an A in music, an A in art, and an F in math, everyone will try and get you to focus on math, right, to improve math. His argument is that if that's just not part of your DNA, if that's not who you are, if that's not part of your personality, then you're going to go from an F to like a D, right? You're not going to make huge strides there. You're not going to all of a sudden become an A student. You're not going to change who you are by focusing on your weaknesses. So I think I strongly believe in that. I believe that oftentimes we put ourselves in the way with that stuff. So I think sometimes what we think might be a weakness might just be fear showing itself in a different way. So I don't necessarily know that, what we think are our weaknesses are always actually our weaknesses, but more so just our unwillingness to try something for fear or for whatever other reason that we may have. But I think regardless of how you are, I think a lot of people can be really successful wedding photographers. I think that there's certainly, these are like the common traits that we've sort of discussed today. But I've also seen people that, fall well outside that norm be very successful as a wedding photographer if you structure your business and run, your photography and treat your clients in a way that's genuine for you. It's like two extreme examples would be someone who is like an extrovert, completely outgoing, just as like loves to feed off of people, loves to like throw directions around and do all that stuff. Like they would be a great wedding photographer, right? They'd go out there, they'd take control of the room, and they could make that work really well for them. So you might say in listening to that, well, that's not me, and so therefore I wouldn't be a wedding photographer. But I would say the converse. I'd say, but if you're an introvert, if you're more shy, reserved, and observant, and you're very analytical about things, if you make your business about that, and now you're the purist, the photojournalist of photography, right, where you just go and observe and you make that part of your brand and your business, clients will hire you for that. So it's not to say that one is right, one is wrong. You just have to make sure that you become self-aware of what makes you tick and what your strengths are and how you can best use that to run a successful photography business. And I think a lot of people can be successful photographers if they structure, wedding photographers, if they structure their business around their strengths.
Yeah. And I think to kind of put a cap on it is, I think, just being honest with yourself, right? Being honest with what are my strengths and my weaknesses, where does that fit, and what does that look like for my business, and not trying to be somebody that you're not, or force yourself into some mold just because you think that, like, you see some other wedding photographer who's successful and you want to make yourself like that person, but that's just not who you are. It's just not gonna work, right? In the long run. Maybe you can do, in the short term you can do it, but over the long haul it's just not gonna work, right? So being honest with yourself and being true to yourself in terms of your strengths and your weaknesses, and play to those.
Well, I think the prerequisite for that, though, is to understand yourself, right? I think that you can try and be honest with yourself, but if you don't understand that, then you've got to, like, I don't think that our industry spends enough time really asking ourselves the right questions, that we understand how we can best serve our clients. And so I think, like, that would be almost like a prescription that I would love our listeners to go and do, is to, like, dig deeper into. This isn't. You don't have to go, like, to the mountaintops and, like, be zen for a couple weeks to really find your true self, but just, like, start to understand yourself better, so you know how you can be genuine to what you discover about yourself.
Yeah, good point. Very good. Well, hopefully that gives some people things to think about when it comes to their personality traits. What's your strengths? What's your weaknesses? We'd love to hear from you. Join in on the discussion on our Facebook group and share your thoughts. All right, let's move on then. We've got a listener question this week. So each week we'll choose a listener question, and this week we've got a question from Jacques. Jacques asking, basically his questions boils down to kind of screen calibration. So he says here that he edits on screens that have been calibrated using the Spider, which is a color calibration tool. Then we check it on a couple of other PCs, and on each PC the image looks different. Sometimes it's too light, it's too dark. So he's wondering, like, how do our clients see them? And how do you control what they see on there? And as far as the digital, like, what if they're not happy because the image doesn't look like it does on your screen? So who wants to tackle that one?
Sounds like a Brian question.
Okay, I would say, first of all, that if you're relying on an online gallery to be the way that your clients view the images and enjoy the images, then you're probably not serving your clients in the best way possible, in my opinion. And I think that's why the three of us, often when we talk about sales or in customer experience or in setting expectations, we often talk about things like prints or albums or things like that. And I think that that needs to be made really clear to your clients. It's like, hey, here's a gallery, or here's your digitals, whatever it is. You need to set those expectations to say, like, obviously, like, they may not look right in your computer if that's how you're going to be enjoying them. But my recommendation would be that you actually don't give the files until the album is in anyways. And that way they know what they're comparing it to, right? They're looking at this beautiful printed album that has no ability to be interpreted as anything else, right, unless they're colorblind, right? In which case they're like, why are all the images black and white? It's like, I guess there's nothing you can do about that. But that way at least they've got sort of a baseline to go with, right? Something that I did many years ago to sort of start this is with digitals. Whenever we deliver any digitals to our clients, we also deliver prints with them. So we made this little box with our lab, and we had it custom designed for us, where I have 5 mats that I put 5 4x6s in that I print off here at the studio, and then with that is their USB key that they get. So whenever they get digitals, they always get 5 prints. So at least they can see the images in the way that I want them to be enjoyed, right? And then they have that baseline to go off of. It also enforces my brand because I'm enforcing the importance of print, which is a big part of what we believe in as a studio. So that's sort of what I would say, I guess.
Yeah, I guess the short story is you can't control what they're going to see on
No.
their end. You have no control over, because they might be viewing it on a tablet, on a PC.
Yeah.
Every screen is going to look a little bit different. So from a digital standpoint, you can't control it. Like you could have it all. The reason you use the spider and color calibrate is so that you're getting consistent output between your screen and your printer. But it doesn't mean that it's going to calibrate it for every other viewer, right?
Exactly.
So you can't control that. And I agree with you. The album or prints are the perfect way to show it. And say, have you taken it as far as say showing prints that were printed, say, at like a Walmart or a Costco, and in a comparison, just to sort of say, like, here, look, just so you're aware, if you do take these somewhere else, this could potentially be what you would get. Robert, have you done anything like that, or?
Well, I agree with what Brian said without going all over it. But yeah, I mean, you could take, that's the thing too, is you could take your color calibrated prints and send them to Costco, send them to Walmart, send them to Apple, send them to your professional lab, send them to, you pick 5 places and send the same 5 files, and I guarantee you they're going to come back looking different. There's going to be color shifts and things like that. So, yeah, you can't control it. But what you can control is, maybe if you want to set your monitors up so that it has the same profiles as your lab and or your album company, so you know that those products going out look great. I think that's the best that we can do. Another thing, like I've had this before too. You have to remember, I've had brides, compare their digital files, the way they see them on the computer, the color and the sharpness and the brightness, to their album. And the type of album that I use is an offset print album. It's printed just like a book is, and ink absorbs into paper, and it's not going to quite look the exact same. So I'm like, you can't do that. You can't compare the two. They're never going to look the same.
An album is not backlit.
Right. So, the simple answer for Jacques is, do your best to make your files look good the way you present them to your client, and then I think that's all you can do at that point. You can't control how great or not so great their computers or devices are.
Yep. Excellent. All right. Well, hopefully that helped Jacques. If you have a question that you'd like us to answer, we'd like to hear from you. You can just head on over to thisweekinphoto.com and click on the Contact Us button to send us a message. You can also submit your questions by emailing us at twipwed@thisweekinphoto, or people also post questions up on our Facebook group, so feel free to jump in there too. All right, let's move on. Our last segment is our Picks of the Week. Each episode we'll share a photography-related item that we think would benefit wedding photographers. Our pick can be anything as long as they're somehow related to photography or the business of photography. Mr. Caparici, what do you have as a pick for us?
Totally cheated.
You cheated.
I had another pick, and I swapped it out as soon as I started talking about Marcus Buckingham. So I'm calling my pick Trombone Player Wanted. For DVD, and I did find it on Amazon, so I linked it there in the show notes if listeners want to go check it out. But definitely recommend going to watch that.
Awesome. Robert, what do you got for us this week?
My pick of the week is going to be just encourage my Sony and non-Sony listeners to go check out Alpha Universe. Within the last 6 or 7 months, fairly new website for Sony, but a lot of great content over there, even if you're not a Sony shooter. Of course, it's Sony related and Sony bias, but a lot of great how-to and how I shot this, and so photographers are always looking for great content about that, especially if you're interested in video, a lot of video content. And there's profiles of those articles, but then you can check out, there's all the other artisans and their work, and see how it relates to you. I am one of a few wedding type people on there, but there are others like Mike Cologne, and who else shoots weddings? It's blanking me right now, but just go Alpha Universe. You go look.
Excellent. Check it out. I was surprised. I thought for sure you were going to pick the new Hasselblad mirrorless medium format camera. It used to be a Hassie shooter.
I have not looked at it yet.
Yeah, there you go.
I just want to say a follow-up too. My last pick from the last episode was the Pluto, the little device that I said I hadn't ordered or used yet. But I did order it. I think it's going to arrive anytime, so I will follow up with my review of that once I get to play it.
Excellent. On a future show, we'll do, instead of a pick, we'll do Robert's review of the week. Sounds good. Awesome. So my pick this week, it's kind of a cool little thing I ran across. I haven't used it a lot yet, but it's something kind of interesting I thought would be kind of neat. It's a little service called Ripple, RIPL.com, and basically it lets you create, they say, easily create eye-catching posts and share them on Facebook and Twitter. So what it does is it creates sort of these animated graphics. So you can take a photograph that you have, and then you can add some text to it, and then it will add some animations to it. So if you want to add some more visual interest, say, to your Instagram feed or Facebook or Twitter or what have you, it's kind of a neat way for designing that. So it's this little app called Ripple.
Cool.
I'll put a link to it, and I think it is it's probably like $1.99 or something like that. No, it's free. It's probably got in-app purchases though, so that's how these things usually work these days.
If you want the tongue effect, then you have to pay $1.99.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Excellent. Well, that brings us to the end of another episode of TWiP Weddings. That was a fun one. I think we had a good discussion today. If you're listening on our website, please subscribe to the show using the box over on the right. And also be sure to sign up for our email list to be notified when new episodes launch and to get exclusive subscriber bonuses. And if you have feedback, suggestions, or comments about the show, you can reach us directly by using our contact form. Just click on the Contact Us menu at the top of the page. So before we go, what's everybody up to, and where can our audience go to find you online? Brian, where can they go?
Sproutingphotographer.com is where all of my education lives. So we have a podcast all about the business of photography. You can find us on iTunes as well as we write actionable articles about the business of photography. So sproutingphotographer.com and getsproutstudio.com if anyone's interested in diving into Sprout Studio, which is the software that we created to help photographers run their business.
Cool. And if they want to find you and your photography? Or?
Right, yes, that thing I do, photography.
That thing you do, yeah.
So yeah, my own photography site is bcapphoto.com, BCAPPHOTO.com.
Excellent. Yeah, Mr. Evans, where can we find you outside of Alpha Universe? Where else can we find you online?
Pretty much everything revolves around my name, so Twitter, Instagram are at Robert Evans, my website, robertevans.com. And on Facebook, Robert Evans Studios.
That's very me-focused, you know.
Yeah, it is very me-focused.
Social media's allowed to. That's the whole point, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess so, yeah.
And you can find me at robertevans@me.com.
Oh, see, there you go.
Oh,
very me-focused.
Nice. Excellent. Well, and if you are looking for me, again, I'm at Bruce Clark most places, Clark with an E. If you want to see what we've been up to with our photography, you can head on over to momentsanddigital.com. Probably visit the blog. That's where the most recent stuff will be. You can see all the weddings and engagements and all that fun stuff we've been up to. So. And with that, that brings us to the end of another episode. Be sure to visit our website at thisweekinphoto.com for this show and all the other great shows that are part of the TWiP network. And thanks again for listening to TWiP Weddings, raising the bar one wedding at a time.